And I have experienced the good, the bad, and the ugly as part of, my lived experience with grief now. We rushed him to hospital. He was put into resus and then intensive care. They didn't know what it was, but there was swelling on the brain. And within a few hours, I was told that he was unresponsive. The swelling on his brain had reached the brain stem and that he was essentially brain dead.
Hi Lou, welcome to the show today. We're going to be talking about grief, which is a topic many people find uncomfortable and don't like to talk about. So therefore, where should we start?
We have to start by not ignoring it. I think that's the worst thing. Like you've just said, grief makes people feel really uncomfortable. As a society, as a culture, we're simply just not equipped or taught how to talk about it, are we? And,
No.
So what we do a couple of things generally. It tends to make us really uncomfortable. And so therefore we say nothing to the person that we know might have lost someone because it makes us feel icky. Or we tend to go into, I've got to try and fix it and make it better. And so we say a lot of platitudes that then come across as meaningless or insincere because we're trying to fix something that is unfixable. And there's something that happens in that kind of spectrum of ignore, just let's pretend it's not happening, to kind of overcompensating in a way. And there's a sort of balance in the middle that we can help people, we can teach, it's a learned skill. We can help teach and educate people on how to feel less uncomfortable with it.
Yeah, and you mentioned it was cultural there, and it certainly is, for our side, because there are cultures that, not celebrate death, but are much better equipped and therefore understand that it is, I guess, part of life. Obviously, there are tragic situations as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about, where actually people are taken earlier than we'd expect. But we do, all of us will go through this grieving point at some part in our life, whether that's, with parents, with partners, with siblings, with, children of our own. There's people have to, come up against it. And like you say, I think because it is so traumatic, we try and block it out thinking, I don't need to worry about that now. But then do you find that grief is, from people you talk to, grief is harder to deal with because we block it out so much?
The longer we block it out, the harder it comes and bites you on the bum later down the line, or at some point, our bodies keep the score. We hold and store all of that trauma within us. So at some point, if you haven't processed that grief in a healthy way, or got it out, or talked about it, or what we tend to do as a sort of society really is put it in a box, pretend it's not happening, stifle it, suppress it, say, I'm fine. Yeah. And we're more than not fine. But then what happens is that at some point, that grief has had nowhere to go, and it has to have somewhere to go. Either, and it's an automatic response. And this is part of us not feeling comfortable around people who are grieving. We immediately give people a tissue, don't we, when they're crying?
Yes. Yeah.
What's that thing like? Oh, stop crying. That's making I feel uncomfortable with you crying. So we we wipe our children's tears away. Even those really subtle behaviors are saying indirectly, really subconsciously, please don't cry. Please don't be upset. And so all of those things, the not feeling like we can cry, the not feeling like we can talk about it, say their name anymore. I mean, I hear from so many people, and they say their name has not been mentioned since the funeral. People just don't want to. So it's like they never existed. And so how, as a grieving person, are you supposed to navigate through that if everyone else has decided, well, they no longer exist. I don't want to see you cry. I don't really want to talk about it because that makes me feel really uncomfortable, that grief has got to go somewhere. So what generally then tends to happen is sort of, people can sink into depression, mental health issues. There's all sorts of different things that it can lead to, really potentially negative outcomes for people.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because I can understand, why we do what we do, from the fact of, oh, I don't want to upset anyone, I don't want to feel uncomfortable, so let's just brush it under the carpet and pretend this never happened and never speak about it again. And, part of you can go, yeah, that's really rational. I completely get that. But actually, exactly like you're saying, and I've heard this a number of times, our body stores all trauma. And if you haven't let it out, it will find a way to come out, and quite often in an unhealthy way. So, what's a healthy way of dealing with grief?
Talking about it, allowing yourself to feel the grief. And grief is very weird. Grief is very unpredictable. You don't know when you might have a wave of it wash over you. For people might be in shock for a long period of time initially, if it's been, sudden or unexpected, for example. Even if it is expected, people can then go into shock because suddenly you're without that person. The brain takes a long time to catch up with what it rationally knows to be true, but emotionally it's still looking for that person to be there, because it's, brain survive on habit, right? And so what then tends to happen is, sorry, I lost track there. What were you?
Yeah, sort of healthy ways, because
a healthy way. That's it.
You're saying about your brain taking a while to catch up. And actually, I've witnessed that with people I know, who that period between someone passing away and almost the funeral, actually, they're just on autopilot and just cracking along, and it's often at a much later date.
Yeah, so, it is.
But sorry, you were talking about healthy ways.
Yeah, so it's kind of, so, and like you say, that period between that person passing away and the funeral, you're busy. You're really busy. Yeah. You're organising stuff. You're having to, you're thrust into the world of organising a funeral, a celebration of life, a service, a ceremony. It's after that the processing needs to happen. And it's normally after that everyone suddenly disappears from sight. No longer that support network seems to shrink all of a sudden. So you don't have as many people to talk to. Like we were just saying, people feel they can't mention the person's name because they don't want to upset you. And once that initial shock then starts to wear off, that's when the reality hits, and you really need to be allowing yourself to go into the grief. But, and again, we don't, do we? We're stoic. We're taught to be resilient. We're taught to have a stiff upper lip and, kind of go, yeah, I'm fine, everything's okay, carrying on as normal. We don't want to be a burden as grievers either. We don't want to be a burden to other people. So it's a double-edged sword, really. If someone does then take the time to ask you how you're doing today, you don't want to burden them with your woes and sort of, pitiful stories. So it's down to the griever to be open as much as they can and as much as they feel able, open with where they're at in that moment. And it's down to the people that care and support those people to keep checking in. It's about talking about it, having appropriate counselling or therapy or, whatever feels appropriate at the time to help process it. I don't particularly think there's huge benefits in sort of going back over events and re-traumatizing yourself. I don't think there's great benefit to that, particularly. But in talking about it, in processing it, in understanding it, it's giving your brain, your subconscious brain, that time to catch up with the conscious brain. So the conscious brain knows and can rationally say, well, I know my person's died, they're not here anymore. The subconscious part of your brain is still looking for them, because the subconscious part of the brain works with patterns and habits, and that's what it's looking for. So if you've lived with a person for years, it's still expecting them to walk through the door at 6 o'clock every evening, because it takes a lot of, unlearning that. And grief is a learning process.
Do you think that, we're talking about sort of dealing with the grief after something has happened. do you think because we don't talk about it almost at any point, we're never prepared? We're never thinking ahead that, you know, I mean, my parents, they're not that old, but they're in their 70s. So, you know, it will be within my lifetime. I would have thought that I'm going to have to deal with that. But actually, I'll be honest, I don't really want to talk about that or think about it. And if someone said, well, what are going to be the plans? I'm like, no, I'm not talking about it. And is that part of the issue as well?
Yeah, I absolutely do. You know, and I've been the same with my parents. So we need to have this conversation. You know, what are your wishes? What do you want? What music do you want? And because you're left with a lot of guesswork. I remember when my gran died 10 or 11 years or so ago now, we were thrown into, you know, it's that panic of, right, I've got to help my mum put a funeral together. She was obviously distraught and devastated. What music do you think she would have liked? What do you think she would have wanted? What stories can we think of to share? Had my mum had been able to have that conversation with her and get her wishes, that whole process would have felt a lot easier in what is already a very difficult, challenging time. But you're sort of thrown into panic mode, aren't you? Because you're like, bloody hell, I've got to do this thing.
What do we do? You know, what are their wishes? And then I've heard of it where families almost start arguing because different people have got different ideas. But actually, if that conversation had been had, you know, almost like, I mean, people write a will with regard to material items, but actually maybe some instructions of what you actually want to happen.
Yeah. And like you say, it's just something that we just simply don't want to address because, we don't want to think about the mortality of our own parents or other family members. We don't want to think about that. But, you know, the simple truth is none of us are getting out of here alive, are we? It's going to happen to everyone. And the more that we can have these conversations around it and that kind of thing, the more comfortable we will become with death and loss and the subsequent bereavement.
Yeah, I mean, what you're doing now and you're talking about it and you're encouraging other people to talk about it, you know, it's fantastic work. And I'm aware that you haven't always done this and it's because of a life-changing event for you. Do you want to talk a little bit, provide some context as to why? Because you are quite passionate about getting people to talk about grief.
Yeah, hugely. So my background, my career, I spent over 20 years in the consumer insight industry, working for agencies and then a huge global company, which I left in 2020, just before lockdown, to do my own thing. I didn't know what, but I then ended up retraining as a life coach, specialized in helping career women who were at that midlife crossroads, helping them figure out their next steps. And really happy doing that. It was really fulfilling work, loved it. What then happened? So in December 2022, early December, my husband took himself to bed, not feeling very well. And he wasn't a man flu kind of person. So for him to kind of go, I'm going back to bed, knew something was wrong. We'd all had colds and snuffles and, you know, all kind of had that winter cold and whatnot. And that was the Saturday morning. Kept going up to check on him and, you know, check he was all right, take him hot drinks and things. In the evening, we heard a huge crash from upstairs, didn't know what the noise was, went up to discover that he had collapsed unconscious. We rushed him to hospital. He was put into resus and then intensive care. They didn't know what it was, but there was swelling on the brain. And within a few hours, I was told that he was unresponsive. The swelling on his brain had reached the brain stem and that he was essentially brain dead. And subsequent tests then showed that he had contracted streptococcal meningitis, bacterial meningitis. And so it had taken him within hours and he never came home. So my young, fit, healthy, strong 40-year-old husband went from, you know, getting excited for Christmas to me trying to plan his funeral, whilst giving the children, we have 3 children, some semblance of normality and, a Christmas, which was just horrific. So that's my story as to how I was plunged into knowing profound, significant loss. And I have experienced the good, the bad, and the ugly as part of, you know, my lived experience with grief now. And I think my coaching background has made me want to just naturally help people and have this conversation. I'm quite outspoken with things anyway. So I have called people out when they've said the wrong thing or when they've just completely abandoned me, which has happened quite often. And so I'm just kind of thinking, right, if this tragedy, if this horrific thing had to happen to me and my family and to my husband, how can I turn that around and how can I make something meaningful with what I've now, you know, the hand that I've been given. And so that has since turned into me pivoting my business away from the career coaching and helping to educate people on, this subject that nobody wants to talk about.
I mean, the story is, you know, I can hear it in your voice, you know, that it was such a traumatic time. And for you, that would have been processing it for you, but equally you mentioned, you know, children as well. So you're trying to grieve and care at the same time. And I'm assuming that, you know, it was just an awful moment. There's no way of glossing over it.
No, it was horrific. My eldest was at his dad's that particular weekend that it happened. So he was 14 at the time. He went to his dad's on the Friday with his stepdad, Pete, not feeling so good, and came back on the Sunday to, you know, for saying that he's not going to make it, or he hasn't made it. Our two youngest were 6 and 8. They were there. They experienced the whole trauma of the ambulance coming in, trying to get him out of the room, ambulances, chaos that ensued, and me coming home and having to tell them that Daddy was never coming home. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot. I have had, still have, I would think, significant trauma and PTSD as a result of the various events that took place over those few days in hospital and everything else, and as do my children. And so it's been a lot. Yeah. And to be honest, and again, this is why I'm so passionate about it, I didn't process my grief. I got the builders in. I did the extension that we've been talking about for, you know, that we'd been planning together. So I couldn't. I had builders in shouting up to me, Lou, where do you want this? Where do you want your new plug socket? Or, you know, noise in the house. And whether I did that subconsciously or not, I might never know, but just to keep that busyness, to keep going, to sort of, you know, like create some semblance of, well, you've got to just keep going, one foot in front of the other. Yeah. And so I didn't and couldn't process that grief properly. I had some counselling, a few sessions of counselling that first year. It was okay, but I think there's only so much talking about and rehashing events that you can do that's not particularly healthy. And it came to a head probably 15, 16 months later when it was Mother's Day weekend and I had what can only be described as a breakdown. The children were coming in, they were talking to me, but I literally couldn't move in bed. I could see their mouths moving, talking to me, but I couldn't hear any words that were coming out. And it was the weirdest, strangest feeling. I've never experienced anything like that at all. What I now know is that was kind of rock bottom for me in terms of me not having dealt with the grief and having kept putting one foot in front of the other and kept being told, oh, you're so strong, Lou, you're doing so amazing. And because I hadn't allowed myself to go there into that dark place. And so that was really the culmination for me, or that the start of that spark of there's got to be more to this. I've got to use this somehow, and I've got to take this and create something, like I said, meaningful, something that can help people, something where if other people are going through this and they're not processing their grief because other people haven't known how to help them do that they might end up in the same boat as I did.
You that mentioned was really. 15, 16 months later. I mean, that's quite a long time, isn't it, for all of that to build up? Do you think actually if you'd been able to process it much earlier on, maybe it would have been, I mean, easy is the wrong word because it's never going to be easy, but just it maybe wouldn't have built up quite as much.
I think so. I think it would have been there anyway because the events of that weekend were so traumatic, and the shock and that sort of, sudden out of order death is obviously going to induce a lot of trauma anyway. I do, however, think that had I had the tools to process it and navigate through it, I would have, earlier, sooner, and even allowed myself to, because, again, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, we just don't want to go there. We put it in a box and just hope it's going to go away. And it doesn't, sadly. So yes, I do think had I had or been equipped with tools that breakdown wouldn't have happened, or it would have happened in a different way that was less severe, I suppose.
Yeah. How can we support people who are going through this? Because I mean, I can think of specific examples where almost I know people who have said, "Oh, I haven't been to see them because I feel uncomfortable." Sort of I'm at that age where people are losing parents, and they've said, "Oh, I haven't popped round and seen that mate because I don't really know what to say." And I get it. But exactly like you're saying, actually, you've called people out, and it could be that, friendships break down because you weren't there to support me. Well, actually, I didn't know what to say or what support you needed, and I can see both sides. So how do we start to unpack that?
Yeah, it's really tricky and it's really sensitive. So it's like, when people say, "Oh, you're always in my thoughts," it's like, okay, well, I don't know that. I don't know that I'm in your thoughts because you never tell me. Something as simple as a text message, when you do pop into somebody's thoughts or when you do think of someone, just let them know. You don't have to say anything profound. Just, you popped into my head, wanted to let you know I'm thinking about you, sending you lots of love. That means so much to someone who is in the depths of grief, just to know that someone's thinking about you and they care. I think another thing, and so many people say, "I don't know what to say," and they fear saying the wrong thing. Yeah. So they don't say anything at all. And believe me, saying nothing at all is worse than saying the wrong thing. So, and some of the things I remember, and to be honest, that first 15 months for me, I can hardly remember any of it. I was just walking around like a zombie. I can see now, and in hindsight, it's a wonderful thing, isn't it? I can see now. I thought I was okay. Clearly was not okay. But I can barely remember any of it. But what I can remember are the people that came and said, "Lou, I have no words. There's nothing that I can say, but I'm here with you. I'm thinking a bit, I'm thinking of you. I love you, that kind of thing." And that meant it meant so much to me. And it's that honesty, and it's the vulnerability of admitting that you haven't got a clue what to say. What can you say?
Yeah.
There's nothing.
Yeah, there's
nothing
really you can say.
And what I often tell people to say, or recommend people to say is, "I'm so sorry for your loss." It's a standard thing that we sort of churn out. I think we've learned.
It's a greeting card quote, isn't
right?
it? Yeah.
And I have had that said to me in such kind of a robotic, "This is what I'm supposed to say to you" kind of way, that it's just come across as sounding really insincere. So I find it a tricky one. One of the things I suggest that people say instead is, "I'm so sorry that your grandma's died." Because that sounds more meaningful than "I'm so sorry for your loss." Saying loss to a grieving person can be quite triggering, because you're like, "Well, I haven't lost them." You lose your car keys down the side of the sofa. That's careless. I haven't lost them. And so it's so nuanced. It's so complex. But, they know. And because we don't like to use the word death or dead or died in our society, but they are. It's the simple truth. And I believe, might be a controversial opinion, the more we can use that kind of language in our everyday parlance, the more comfortable we will be with it. when Pete died, I was looking up, how do I talk about this to the children? They were so young. And what they recommend is say it how it is. You've got to use clear language. You can't say they've fallen asleep. You can't say they've gone to heaven, because they think they're going to come back. You have to say, Daddy's dead. And that, to us as grown-ups that don't like to speak like that, sounds so hard and cut and dried and final.
Brutal. Yeah.
It does sound absolutely brutal, but that's what we have to say to children to help them understand and to help them process it. So, and it's maybe because I've said that and I've used that language with them that I feel more comfortable around it. But yeah, what's wrong with saying, I'm so sorry that your grandma died?
Yeah, but actually mentioning who it is as well, rather than like, so sorry for your loss. You could be just referring to the car keys that you've misplaced, but you're going to get back because you will find them. Whereas that's not the same when someone dies.
No. So even it's quite simple, but it's a good opener. So, for people that aren't sure what to say, for people who don't want to upset anyone, that's what I recommend as an opener. And then be prepared to be there, listen, just, no judgment. Grief does weird things to people. It comes and goes in waves. I bumped into a friend in a cafe probably a few weeks after my husband had died, and I was walking out and I was laughing and joking with my best friend, and she saw me. She said, I didn't want to approach you. You looked so happy. And obviously I was walking around in a complete state of shock. So
it's like a trance.
My brain just hadn't even, accepted it yet at all. No. And then you kind of feel bad. You're like, oh, I shouldn't have been laughing. I shouldn't have been laughing at all. And people feel, so it does the weirdest things to you. So no judgment, open mind, sit with them. Another thing that I sometimes suggest to people is if they knew the person that has died, if they knew them, say, oh, I remember this one time, are you open to me sharing this story about them? They might want to. I would say 9 times out of 10, they will be hungry for that information. If it's going to just set them off and be a bit much right now, then if you've asked permission to share that memory or share a story about them, the grieving person has the opportunity to say, I'm feeling a bit wobbly today. Do you mind if we, can you tell me next time? But I would say most of the time, people love to hear stories about their person. They love it. So share a memory, share something. Or if you didn't know their person, say, what was your mum like? Tell me about her.
Yeah.
What did she like to do? And again, you're giving them the opportunity to recognize. It's about recognizing and acknowledging that person existed. They were there because to them, they will continue to exist in their hearts and they will love them for always. And so we need to acknowledge that they existed too and just get out of that thing of, oh, I don't know what to say. What can I say? Ask them about their person.
It's really interesting what you said there about hearing stories and things like that, and because we do want to relive some of those, and I sometimes think we maybe don't do enough to generate those stories. And what I mean by that is I was speaking to someone a few days ago, and they'd lost a parent, and they sort of were going. They just wish they could go round for a cup of tea or a coffee and things like that, and were almost resenting that they'd worked so much and things like that. Do you think we need to make more time for human contact and understanding that actually our time here is limited?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even when I was doing my career coaching role, I used to say, this isn't a dress rehearsal. Don't stay stuck in a career that you're not happy in. You've still got a chance to write the next chapter. And my experience now, obviously, I know for a fact that we are not guaranteed tomorrow. Life can change like that in a heartbeat, and we have to live it and embrace it like there is no tomorrow. Like we're not guaranteed tomorrow. And so, yes, that that need for human connection, and to have those stories, that used to be the case, the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, and all of those things where community was so much more valued, where, the elders would come in, or, community, the neighbours, everyone would be part of your day-to-day life, and conversations would happen over the garden fence, and just doesn't happen anymore. Just doesn't happen. I don't know if you're familiar with the book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. Do you know that book?
You know what? Someone literally mentioned that to me in that same conversation recently.
Yeah.
Was it a nurse that wrote it?
She was. It's by a lady. It's highly recommended. It's by a lady called Bronnie Ware. She became a palliative nurse, I think in Australia, and she ended up having really great relationships with these people that she was caring for in their final days, and through all of these conversations, she sort of compiled their stories and created these five regrets of the dying. And the number one was, and I'm paraphrasing now, but something like, live the life you want to live, not the one other people think you should. Something like that. And it's essential. And another one of them is, I wish I hadn't worked so hard.
Yeah,
I think that's the second one. And there's 3 more, which I can't remember at the moment. But very much about, we're not here for long. Live the life you want to live, embrace it, spend more time with the people that you care about and love. So that, you're right. When it does come to the end, we've got stories to share, and stories that turn into memories that we can, at the end of the day, that's all we've got left.
Yeah, I guess it's not waiting for those special occasions. I've seen those sort of memes saying, you don't need a special occasion to wear your favourite jacket. Just wear it. And it was I had a past podcast guest, Heidi. She sadly lost her sister, and she said her sister always used to say, "Oh, in 2 years' time, I'm going to go and do that," or "Next year, I'm going to go and do this," or "For my 40th birthday, I'm going to go and do this." Never got to that stage. So you don't need to wait for a specific thing to take a trip or visit someone. Just do it. Yeah
Absolutely. You've got to grab it while you've got it. And the worst thing surely would be, if you know you're sort of you've only got a few weeks to live or whatever, would be to have all of those regrets, wouldn't it? That's got to be the worst thing. At least, I mean, what I would certainly hope, if it comes, when it's my turn, is that I can say, well, I did everything I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing. I didn't wait. And but it's definitely, what happened to Pete, my husband, has definitely sort of amplified that and given me that sense of, well, you don't know what's around the corner. And if we're gonna be here, let's bloody be here, and be here big time, because we only get this one chance to make an impact.
Yeah, I mean, we have those, so as I guess the hope, and that sounds a funny way, is that we just grow very, very old and pass away. Realistically, lots of people get given some knowledge through to a health situation, whether it's cancer or saying that you've only got this time to live, and equally, like your husband, just taken, and that needs to be the wake up call that actually the just growing old and passing away peacefully might not be you. Do what you can now, and do the things that you enjoy, and lots of us, that's family and trips and whatever it is, but take advantage of that if you've got it, because I mean, if anyone's listening, I'm sitting here talking to you, Lou, and you don't have that opportunity now with your husband. You've got the memories, which are, fantastic for you. But I'm sure you'd say to anyone, spend time with your loved ones.
Yeah. Tell them you love them. I mean, it's one of the things that I don't regret about our relationship, was that I know that he will have gone, whatever way, that he knew how much we all loved him. And the same goes for all of us, because we said that to each other, meaning it every single day. And our relationship was fantastic. So never never hold a grudge, never go to bed sort of on an argument, all of those typical things that we hear. And it's like, yeah. But yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. It's just make sure the people you love know it.
Yeah.
You
Can
could
I
walk
ask how
out the
you're
front door and get run over by a bus, couldn't you? And you might
Yeah.
never have told them.
No. Can I ask how your children are doing? Because obviously in this process, you're helping people deal with grief. And for children, this can be particularly challenging. How are they doing? And have you helped them to sort of and support them through this process, I guess?
They're doing okay. Children's grief is really it's really quite interesting in as much as they call it kind of jumping in and out of puddles. So they will jump into the grief and be upset and all the rest of it, but then just as quickly jump back out again.
Okay. Yeah.
And my daughter in particular has exhibited this a lot. So she's very expressive. She cries a lot and she gets very upset and she misses daddy terribly. And so I'll be sitting with her, consoling her, she'll be crying. And then the next minute it's like, Mummy, look at my cartwheel. It's like, wow. But it's to do, and this is so clever, it's to do with their central nervous system. So their little bodies, and they're so in tune with their little bodies because they haven't been conditioned to not be yet.
Yeah.
Their little bodies know that that's enough. And so it pulls them out of that, kind of going back into that trauma or reliving that sadness. It pulls them out as quickly as it pulled them in. And so it'll be like, oh, what's for dinner? Or, oh, look at that dog, or and they will be completely distracted. So that's been really interesting because for me, obviously when we are grieving and when we're feeling upset and crying and we're having a griefy moment, we're in it as adults, aren't we? We're in it and we're sort of inconsolable, and it takes a long time for us to, sometimes to come through the other side of that, and that's fine too. But with kids, it's like, what's wrong with them? Sorry, they don't care. They don't care anymore. But I've learned that that's how children grieve. It's safer for them. They don't want to be in that dark space for very long, and so their bodies go, no, that's enough. Do a cartwheel. And that's it. It's been very interesting because all three of them have dealt with it very differently. So my eldest was 14. He then kind of went off the rails a little bit at school. That was his outlet. He got quite disruptive in class. I was getting phone calls home from school saying he's got another detention and all the rest of it. But that was his outlet. He seems to have come through the other side of that now. He's doing his A-levels now, and I know people would be really proud of him. So that was difficult. I think he felt a little bit like people weren't giving him as much of the sort of grief attention because Pete wasn't his dad, but he was his parent, and he parented him like a dad for 2.5 years. Charlie, our middle child, was 8 at the time. He is autistic, so he finds it very difficult to even understand his own feelings and the feelings of others, and to take those cues. So he has barely cried. I think he takes it all out on the football pitch. He's a phenomenal little footballer. That's where it's like that. His body is allowing him to move through it, and he deals with it very differently. Our daughter Matilda was 6, almost 7 at the time. She sings to Daddy. She writes him letters. She writes him songs. She does poetry. She dances for him. She's very expressive in her grief. So in a way, she's almost dealing with it in the most healthy way because she's fully expressing it. She will cry. She will, do all the things that we would expect a grieving child to do, in that sort of very, very healthy way. But she's angry. She's got a lot of anger. She actually said on holiday, I overheard a conversation. I don't know the context, but she was talking to some her little friends, and she said in a very angry way, "Well, my daddy's dead, but my grandma's still alive." And to her, it's cut and dry fact, because to her that's so unfair because it's the wrong way round. That's the wrong way round. And while I know, she loves her grandma, she wouldn't want her to be dead either.
No.
To her little brain, that shouldn't have happened. That's the wrong way around. So she's very angry about that. So there's that sort of to process as well.
Yeah, I guess it is that order, because I have heard that before with, you know, parents, you know, burying children. It is the wrong order, and I guess for ourselves that makes it even harder to process. I mean, I really like the, you know, you said they are dealing with it, and that, you know, hopefully by having that your support, you know, I'm sure Pete will be looking down very proud that as you're allowing them to grieve in that way, so that actually, you know, I say make the best of what's a shit situation. There's no glossing around of it, but for kids to grow up and
talk about him
be
all
rounded
the time.
adults.
Yeah, you know, I want them to know him. I really hope they will be old enough to remember him and have proper memories of him, not just ones that they think are memories. So I talk about him all the time. I share, you know, they've even got to the point where it's like, oh, mummy, you've told us this 3 times already. But I'm just so, you know, certain that I want them to know Daddy and who the kind of person that he was. We celebrate, it's his birthday coming up a week on Tuesday. We're going to go out for dinner. I know my daughter's already made a card for him. I've asked her what she wants to do with it. So yeah, there's still all of those different opportunities to celebrate him and who he was. And for me, it's really important to do that. And I think it gives us an opportunity in, you know, as I've referred to, a culture where we don't talk about or access our grief and we tend to bury it, that to, you know, access it. And on those days that are hard, the anniversaries, the milestones, that are still so many more milestones to come. I think people think once you've done the first year, that you've done all those milestones because you've had the anniversary, you've had their birthday, you've had all of your birthdays have come and gone. But there's so many more milestones, you know, even applying for our son's secondary school that I did earlier in the year, you know, even just without someone to, you know, talk about it with, you know, even things like that are huge. And, you know, you're doing everything on your own. And there's all those new hurdles that are yet to come, the teenage years and university and, you know, all of those things. So for me, the more open conversations we can have as a family about how we're all feeling. I'm always very open when I'm not having a great day, or I'm just feeling a bit sad, because then that gives them permission for them to be sad too. And that's okay.
Lee, I mean, your story has been, you know, there's been times when I've had that sort of lump in my throat and sort of not really sure what to follow up with, but we've carried on talking because exactly like you said, actually saying nothing is often worse. You know, thank you for your honesty and the way you've explained your story today and what you're doing now. You know, I mean, if there is someone at the moment who's listening and they're just going through some grief themselves, what a hint and tip sounds a terrible way of putting it, but what because there isn't any quick fix for this, but what would you say? Is it talking and just accepting that grief will be there?
It's riding the waves. It's allowing yourself, when a wave comes, to go into the wave and feel it. What we're not very good at is sort of, you know, we're taught that things like sadness, anger, resentment, guilt, that they're not helpful emotions, because again, we're not comfortable with those emotions. We're taught that happiness and joy and gratitude are better emotions, aren't they? But, you know, we are humans and we have the full spectrum of emotions. And I always say to people, be okay with the less positive ones, because that's what grief is. Grief is like, I always kind of liken it to, like, you know, like a backpack. And into that backpack, when grief arrives, and grief comes in many forms, right? It might be divorce, it might be the loss of a job, kids leaving home. We suffer different kinds of losses throughout our life. And into that backpack, we put fear, anger, guilt, resentment, sadness, all of those feelings. And we carry that backpack around with us. And that backpack is bloody heavy if we don't unpack it. And every now and again, we just need to take it off, take the load off, unpack those difficult emotions and lighten that load of the emotional pain that we feel when we suffer significant loss like that. So allow yourself to unpack that bag. It's not easy, but it's worth it. And time, it really annoys me when people say time is a healer. Yes, it is. But you wouldn't say that to a footballer that's broken their leg, would you? You'd strap it up, you'd take them for an x-ray, you would put a cast on it, you'd give them physio, you'd make sure they were rehabilitated before they went back on the pitch. Time is obviously part of that, and time would, the healing process takes place over time. But you can't just say to a grieving person, oh, time will heal, time will fix it, because time on its own isn't going to. No. You need the tools, you need the support, you need to be taking action so that time does heal, unless you want to take it, 20 years. But I'm not here for burying it for 20 years and then getting ill as a result of it. I'm here for dealing with it in the here and now, so you can live your life, more fully. I think with death, it teaches us to live more fully.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm here for. We have to be. So top tips, really hard, but allow it, be with it, sit with it, navigate through it. Time does heal as long as you are putting systems or something in place to help that healing process.
Lee, thank you so much today. I'm sure you've got some resources that I can put a link to in the description of this, so I'll make sure I do that for anyone listening. But thank you once again for coming on and talking us through it. It's a topic that is an uncomfortable conversation for many people, but actually needs to happen, because we will all have grief at one point within our life. So thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Balanced Ambition podcast. I genuinely hope the stories inspire you as much as they inspire me. If you found value in today's conversation, please share it with a friend. And remember, by subscribing, you won't miss an episode, and it would truly mean the world to me. Stay balanced, and I'll see you next time.